Okay, so welcome to our second module for our Gesto class. And for this module, for the next 3 weeks, we will be talking about interdisciplinarity, science, technology, and society, and the prospects of disciplinary crossovers. And we will be talking about how STS is applied in many disciplines and how the integration and interactions of the many disciplines and fields of studies influences science, technology, and of course also impacts society as well. So for the first lesson under this module, we're going to be talking about how competition is a very important force that influences how science and technology flourishes in a society and how competition influences the impact of science and technology in a given society. For this first lesson, we're going to be talking about the 12 pillars of competitiveness that is used in order to measure the competitive index of different countries. And in here, we'll be able to see the different dimensions and factors that basically helps innovation flourish in a given country. And as we go along these 12 pillars, I would like you to reflect and evaluate kung nasaan ang Pilipinas. Where is our country? Where is our state? And where is our society in relation to the standards that are being set here in these competitive index indicators? The first competitive index indicator is institutional environment. So basically, this includes the legal and administrative framework of public and private institutions through which people, companies, and governments interact. So the argument here is that the nature of the governance of the different institutions that make up a state or a society influences the way science, technology, and innovation is flourishing in that given society. So for this specific pillar, societies and states are being measured using the following indicators. First, the degree of transparency of the state budget, the extent to which it reports the total collection of taxes, the way it reports the expenditures, the flows of where the people's money and all the money coming from external sources are being used there. And of course, also, we also talk about private institutions, the degree to which companies are audited externally. So basically, these two indicators show us the nature of transparency and accountability of the different institutions in a society. And we also argue that these are important factors that make innovation flourish in a given society. Because when public and private institutions are honest and accountable and transparent, practitioners, professions, scientists, technologists, and other stakeholders are incentivized and motivated to innovate. And just like any type of relationship, stakeholders, sectors of society, professionals, innovators are more comfortable in sharing their ideas, in sharing their innovations, in sharing their expertise to institutions which they trust. The second pillar for competitiveness in a society is infrastructure. And specifically, we talk about transport infrastructures related to energy supply, and telecommunications infrastructures, which are all fundamental in a nation's competitiveness. So first, why transport? Because efficient transport is very important in order to deliver and to do exchange of goods and services, which are, of course, important in being able to come up with the new innovations. And of course, when you talk about transport, we just don't talk about the ability of the vehicles, but we talk about the whole of the transport system, from the quality of the roads, from to the railroad systems, to the airport, the terminals. We also talk about the rules in relation to transport, urban planning, and basically this all comes together in order to make a transport system efficient in a given society, which in turn will help in the viability and flourishing of innovations in society. Next, of course, is the infrastructures related to energy supply. So, the country being able to harness and create energy is very important in innovation, especially in science and technology, or in electricity. Definitely, light is definitely needed. And when these are accessible and cheap, then we expect it to be able to harness more innovations. And that's measured by the electrification ratio. What extent of the country has access to a form of electricity. And then, of course, we talk about also telecommunications infrastructures, because telecommunication is a very important dimension in innovation, because of the internet, and these connectivities are needed in order to have access to information, which will be used in order to create the innovations and to be able to disseminate the innovations that are made. So, importante ang telecommunications. What are the indicators that are not said here, but I feel are also very important, are, of course, the reliability of the internet, the data connectivity, the ratio of the country in terms of accessibility to the internet, how many per capita ang connected sa internet, mga ganon. And also, another dito, hindi ko nabanggit kanina, is also railway infrastructure is also very important in innovations, because again, delivery and transport and exchange of goods and services and materials in order to be able to create innovation. So, infrastructure is a very important indicator that predicts the innovation in a society. Next, the third pillar of competitiveness is macroeconomic environment. And it is argued that stable macroeconomic environment will allow a better development of the competitiveness of a country. High rates of inflation or deflation, high payment interest by the requested loans, and high levels of fiscal deficit can hinder economic growth and also hinder innovativeness of a certain state. So, syempre, if mas mataas yung interest mo from the loans basically can be the birth of a certain innovation. So, pag mas mataas ang interest, mas disincentivized or demotivated ang isang potential innovator to access the possible capital in order to make innovations flourish. No, of course, inflation, deflation, not just affects innovativeness in general, but generally the whole economic status of a given community or a society. And some of the indicators being used to measure this specific pillar is government debt. Well, good luck to us. And then, of course, inflation and the country credit ratio. So, these are generally macroeconomic indicators that tell us that this is the macroeconomic environment, and in a certain way, this can predict how innovative the people or institutions in a country could be. Next, pillar number 4 is health and primary education. So, the existence of health services as primary education centers are vital so that future and present workers can perform their work productively. So, syempre, we want a healthy population, because if a certain person or a population is healthier, they are most likely more economically productive than those who aren't healthy or those who have diagnosed diseases or disabilities. And people who are healthy are less likely to absent themselves from work. And of course, people who are healthier would most likely have, better brain function, and better brain function would basically lead to creativity and scientific imagination, which is basically the birth of innovations. Also, very important pillar, primary education, because you need to have some sort of foundational education in the math, sciences, humanities, social sciences, literature, in order for you to become innovative. You also have to know a little bit about history, a little bit of anthropology, sociology, in order for you to be able to think about society's problems that you would like to innovate on. So, primary education is a very important precursor to innovative thinking. And that is also what our current educational system is going for. One of the reasons why we shifted from a K-10 curriculum to a K-12 curriculum for primary education is because to give you more more subjects, more courses that will be able to stimulate your critical thinking and scientific imagination, collaboration skills, no, lifelong skills, so that you are going to be expected to become innovators in a society. Siyempre, good health is seen when there are good health-related facilities from a primary level. When I say primary level, these are health centers, which basically looks into preventable ways that could protect the population from getting illness. And of course, we also have more advanced healthcare systems, such as your big hospitals, to be able to address current illnesses and diseases and disabilities. And then in relation to primary education, it's also very important to have good and accessible infrastructure for education, good human resources for education, good teachers, well-trained teachers. So these are all important precursors to good health and primary education. Some general indicators that we use in order to measure health and primary education, syempre, pangunahin ko na to, no? Enrollment rate in primary education. But of course, we just don't count how many people enroll or how many children enroll in primary education. We also have to compute the completion of primary education, no? And then we also look into life expectancy. When we say life expectancy, when a certain person is born in a given country, when do we expect that person to die or expire? No? In the Philippines, the life expectancy is around 60, between 60 to 70. So I think that's better than underdeveloped countries and better now than it was before. I just don't know how the whole pandemic thing will play out, but at the moment, that is our life expectancy. Countries who are more developed and innovative, you would see that they have higher life expectancies. Like, for example, we've seen crazy long life expectancies in Japan, for instance. Their life expectancy is almost 80. And their issue now is not really more of getting people productive or getting people educated. Their issue now is how to take care of the aging population. So there, health and primary education as pillars of competitive index. Next, higher education and training is the fifth pillar for competitive index. Countries that want to improve competitiveness must have specialized and quality higher education centers, training present and future workers to generate products and or services with a high added value. So primary education will just give you the basic courses in order for you to be able to become lifelong learners and be able to survive life and get the enough skills for you to be able to make a living. But in order for a certain society to be able to make innovations that have higher value, to be able to make discoveries of higher value and will be able to address advanced social problems, we need advanced degrees. And therefore, the quality and the accessibility of higher education in a certain country is very important. In the Philippines, we have a lot of universities, we have a lot of college, but the problem is, of course, one, the quality of the college, and then number two is the accessibility. No, only 3% of the population who have entered primary education really get into to tertiary education. I'm sorry. So yun. So syempre, what are the indicators for this specific pillar? Syempre, the university enrollment rate and the degree of investment in training for workers by companies. So for example, do we send our regular employees for advanced degrees like master? So for example, some of you may own a business in the future, or maybe continuing your parents' business or somebody else's business, and you have to be able to invest in training some of your performing employees by providing them scholarships and investing in them to get into master's degrees or PhD degrees or other doctorate degrees in order to foster more competitiveness, not only for your company, which is of course that's ideal, but in general, it all adds up to the general competitiveness of the country. Next, pillar number 6, goods markets efficiency. So this basically avoids excessive bureaucratic procedures and taxes that slow down the market. Existence in the market of demanding customers and buyers forces companies to continue innovating. So this one shows two dimensions. The first one is how is it easy to establish and sustain a business or sustain a living in a given society, no? Marami bang bureaucracia in terms of, getting into business. But a good thing is, in generally, not also in the Philippines, we have already entered what we call digital economy. You see, digital economy, you can already set up a startup online, and we see that a lot now in the pandemic, being able to tap into our innovative minds in order to be able to create products and services that have not been available before and deliver these services via online, e-commerce, digital economy. The second one, we also have what we call gig economy. This is now an increasing acceptability of freelancing, especially among the younger generation. So if you have a specialized ability, like for example in the arts, design, creations, project planning, people also are able to sell themselves and sell their services, of course supported by e-commerce and digital marketing. So digital economy, gig economy has flourished or has expedited some of the business there used to be business challenges that we had before. Hindi na siya ganon kahirap ngayon, especially for those who are trying to start a business, however, of course, ito nga lalagyan na naman nila ng bureaucratic hurdle, sabi nila online businesses must be registered now, so again, that increases the procedure, that increases the bureaucracy, and that decreases the efficiency of markets, in a society, which decreases its competitiveness, which decreases, innovativeness. Boo-hoo. Next, the degree of sophistication of the buyers, which is the second dimension. Siyempre, people or producers, innovators, are more motivated to innovate when the people demand for good services, demand for different services. And usually, more sophisticated buyers, more sophisticated markets are seen in developed countries, wherein, they try to push the companies to give them more, Like for example, when was the last time you were really satisfied with an upgrade ng iPhone or ng Samsung or any form of smartphone? But the point is, the smartphone industry is like upping its game every time, even the small companies, It's because consumers are getting more demanding about what they need in a cell phone, and therefore the companies are incentivized and motivated to innovate further in terms of technology. So the more sophisticated, the more demanding the market is, the more innovators and companies are incentivized and motivated to invest in innovations. Next is labor market efficiency. Competitive countries must have an efficient, flexible, and gender equitable labor framework. In the Philippines, we have good labor, like people, And the fact that we have good labor is a bad thing for the Philippines because we export our labor. Dahil ang galing natin labor, and then we are cheap labor when in relative to other countries that are developed. So, kaya tayo nag-export ng human resources. But basically, the labor framework and the labor environment in the Philippines not very good, and therefore this demotivates, disincentivizes people to work better because wages and productivity in the Philippines not good, not very much protected, unless you are in a really good company, Labor policies for hiring and firing, and the extent to which they are protected by the government, and the percentage of women workers. In the Philippines, we're kind of good in terms of gender equitability in employment. We are better than most of our ASEAN counterparts, sometimes even better than our developed counterparts in relation to economic productivity and involvement of women. But for other other labor frameworks, medyo maghahabol pa ang Pilipinas, no, in relation to labor market efficiency. And of course, no, the more efficient the labor market is, the better the innovations will be in a given society. Next is financial market development. A stable, transparent, and secure market will allow to obtain new funds for investments that have an impact on the improvement of competitiveness, as well as ensuring the capital of companies and the people of the country at all times. So generally, the financial nature and the stability of financial institutions in a given society is helping innovativeness in that given society. So how do we measure that? By looking at the degree of financing given to small and medium enterprises by financial institutions, and the liquidity of ratio of banks, availability of money in the banks, which is basically could be used for investments by small and medium enterprises or SMEs. Which again, of course, SMEs is also one area in a society where innovations can flourish as well. Next is technological readiness. Competitive countries must be able to adapt and quickly implement technological innovations that allow an increase in productivity and competitiveness. So, what is the disposition of companies or people and stakeholders on the latest technology? And the technology adoption rate by companies. And in the Philippines, we're not that kind of good in terms of digitalization of services, no, medyo mabagal. And in relation to like online delivery of learning pa lang for the pandemic, no, De La Salle is doing better than most, but we can't say that De La Salle is offering it like perfectly. So you can just imagine how online delivery of classes are offered and are implemented in less equipped schools, no? So, ayun. So, generally in the Philippines, there's a cultural lag in relation to absorption of technology into our system, both from a public and a private perspective. For instance, when I've been to Singapore, Hong Kong, and London and Sweden, for example, fast foods are already ordered via touch screens. In the Philippines, we're just adopting that. For example, 70 years ago, in the States, they no longer use mercurial thermometers. We only prohibited the use of mercurial thermometers in Philippine hospitals around 15 years ago. So, ganun tayo kabagal in terms of absorbing and changing our systems to adapt new technologies. I mean, we can already see a lot of models in terms of how we can do mass testing and isolation from nearby countries and developed countries. But amazingly, there seems to be a lag in terms of how we can change our policies and allot for resources to follow the effective models that we already see in the way COVID-19 was handled by successful countries beside ours. So, medyo talaga mabagal ang technological readiness ng Pilipinas. Next is market size. The size of the market is closely linked to productivity of companies. Large markets will allow companies to manufacture in large quantities, and the effect of globalization makes markets cross the borders of countries, expanding throughout the planet. So, generally, globalization increases the market. The bigger the market, the more companies are incentivized and motivated to innovate. Kasi alam nila na maraming bibili ng produkto nila, maraming mag-a-avail ng serbisyo nila. So, they are compelled to also innovate so that they could offer more and generally to also earn more. And of course, it all adds up to a better innovativeness in the whole country. So, the indicators are size of the domestic market and size of the external market. Next, we have business sophistication. Countries that have good business networks, where specialized companies, supplier, manufacturer, institutions are well interconnected, will lead to the creation of clusters being a key element and catalyst of the country's competitiveness. So, the supply chain management in a country, very important in terms of making innovativeness happen. No? The connection from materials to services to institutions, and the way they are distributed to the people who are going to consume them, very important in order to incentivize and motivate people and stakeholders to become innovative. So how do we measure business sophistication in a given society? One, quality and quantity of suppliers available, and the sophistication of the productive process. And lastly, innovation is also measured. So, competitiveness predicts innovation, and innovation also predicts competitiveness of a certain country when compared with other states. So, innovation is the engine for the creation of new products, services produced by a nation, increasing its value and therefore competitiveness. Countries must promote both public and private investment in R&D, collaboration networks between universities and qualified scientists and private companies with the aim of creating and promoting these new technologies. So how do we measure innovation of a given state? One, to what extent do private companies invest in research and development in their companies? Diba? And probably we only see those in big companies. But in smaller companies, parang hindi sila masyadong invest in R&D. So you, probably future business managers in the future, you may think of allotting budget, no, in order to have people in the company do research and development to foster innovativeness, innovative products, diba? And it all adds up so that the competitive advantage of the country would be better. And then the innovation capacity of a certain company. Innovation capacity basically means the length or the duration of time to be able to exploit new innovations for the betterment of a certain system. So yon, innovation capacity. The World Economic Forum, which basically conceptualized these 12 pillars, further categorized these indicators into 3 groups. The first group, institutions, infrastructures, macroeconomic environment, and health and primary education, were basically grouped as factor-driven economies because these indicators are basically parang background foundational factors in order for innovation and competitiveness to flourish. Next, we have higher education and training, goods market efficiency, labor market efficiency, financial market development, technological readiness, and market size were efficiency-driven economies. So these economies or these societies who have good scores in relation to this next set were basically considered as economies that were efficient in relation to competitiveness. That is what makes them competitive. They're efficient. And then finally, the last two, business sophistication and innovation, were indicators that pointed to innovation-driven economies. So in this video, we were able to go through the 12 pillars of competitiveness and identified the specific indicators that are measured in order to describe these pillars. We also correlated these pillars in relation to the flourishing or the state of innovation in a given society. And then we further categorized them into factor-driven, efficiency-driven, and innovation-driven.